universe, evolution.
I think a scientist has a duty to society. He's really being paid to find out what the facts are in a number of different areas. And if he then doesn't tell the public what the facts are, I think he's neglecting his responsibilities. That's one thing a scientist owes society, the truth, as he sees it. And I don't think he should be frightened from that by reactions by newspapers, media and so on, or ill-advised students and other people who don't want to know. Even a right idea is often, first of all, encounters a good deal of hostility. Remember Galileo or Darwin or any of the famous scientists. Obviously, if you have original creative ideas, they must be novel, and therefore the people who hold the orthodox views must dislike it and criticize you for it. That's obvious. It always happens. So you have to have a certain degree of intellectual courage to keep on with it, regardless of that kind of criticism.
He's one of the best-known and most prolific psychologists in the world. Hans Eysenck has written more than 70 books, including bestsellers like Know Your Own IQ and Test Your Own Personality. He set up the first department of psychology in London and devised the now famous Eysenck Personality Questionnaire. Yet while he's been a professor for over 30 years, he's become notorious for championing views based, it's said, on highly controversial evidence. He's been condemned as a bigot, as a dangerous maverick, even a racist. While he says he's just presenting the facts, others question whether it's even science.
When I started out in science, I felt a bit like a big friendly dog who gets kicked in the teeth because of the reception that original ideas received by other people. I found that many people preferred their illusions to facts and were rather cross when you pointed out that the facts weren't in agreement with what they were thinking.
Eysenck left Germany at the age of 18. By 39, he was professor of his own department, pursuing a career that has hotly divided critics ever since.
I think Hans Eysenck conforms particularly strongly to one type. That is to say, the man who can't lose any step in any argument without feeling that he's lost face.
And when you get beaten in an argument by somebody who's not politically correct but almost rejoices in being politically incorrect, they hate him, and they hate him for his success and the ease at which he does things.
Oh, there's no doubt about it that his critics are very often arguing from the point of view of ideologies. There's no doubt about it. But in science you can't have two sets of facts that contradict themselves. Either he's right or he's wrong.
He has absolute right for free speech. He has an even more absolute right to promote scientific truth. That's what science is all about. However unpalatable that truth may turn out to be. My problem with his argument is that I don't believe it to be the truth.
In 1970, Eysenck published his now notorious book on race and intelligence. This interpreted the results of IQ tests taken by white and black Americans. He caused an outcry.
Now, it has been known for 80 years or more that in the United States there are quite marked differences in IQ between blacks and whites, of about 15 points of IQ. And the question really is, what causes it? It used to be taken for granted that the causes were environmental. but the improvement in the state of blacks has never been reflected in any change in IQ. Also, there are a number of experiments to disprove some of the environmental theories. For instance, it isn't true that black children do better on tests if they're tested by blacks than by white testers and so on. Even if you take black and white children whose parents are equal in socioeconomic status and who go to the same school, there's still a difference of about 12 points and so on. So really, the only contribution I made was to summarize the evidence and to suggest that this was a very important area in which we simply didn't know the answer. And even that brought down the house on me, as it were, because some people simply didn't want to know about the evidence, about the facts. They wanted everybody to say, sort of on a priori grounds, no, obviously everybody's equal.
I like to think, perhaps wrongly, that I know the literature fairly well in human genetics. I have never seen a single piece of published evidence which I believe that shows any genetic difference in ability between black people and white people.
The race and IQ story is a fairly ugly one. People who normally like to think of themselves as scientists, rigorous, abandoned all rigor and scientific principle and just started to argue as politicians. And they saw this evidence that black children weren't benefiting in the way that people had claimed from special educational provision, and wanted to confront society at large with that body of evidence, and wanted to say that this doesn't prove that blacks are inferior, but my God, it suggests it. And you should take note of that. And many people had that impulse. I think Eysenck succumbed to it pretty fully, but he absolutely wasn't alone.
Eysenck's work was seized on by the National Front. His suggestion that American blacks might be genetically inferior played into the hands of racial politics. He himself was called a racist. He was attacked at a lecture in London University. In Melbourne, students tried to prevent him from speaking.
There were quite a large number of students who in some way seemed to resent that the university had invited me at all. And they were beating up some of the people who were trying to keep them away. And finally the chairman said, well, maybe we better stop it. And I didn't feel emotional about it. I thought it was rather odd. The behavior of these very left-wing students was, of course, very similar to that which I'd encountered in Germany, where the Nazis beat up and disrupted the lectures of socialists and Jewish and other people with whom they disagreed. And to find it over here and in Australia was really quite upsetting in a way, because we always thought of these countries as a home of free speech rather than this kind of fascist oppression. And but it happened, and I think it was very much a change for the worse.
Eysenck had actually grown up in Hitler's Germany. There, anti-Nazis lived in fear.
My background in Germany produced really maverick mentality, because in the school I went to, apart from the Jewish children, all the others practically were Nazi, or at least very conservative and leaning in that direction. I was the only one who was not inclined in that direction, and really outspokenly anti-Nazi, which could be quite a dangerous sort of thing. If I hadn't been the biggest and strongest in the class, I might have suffered grievously. But then you don't beat up somebody on all the school teams of tennis and football and so on. So I managed to get by, but it did get quite dangerous in the end, so I had to leave.
Eysenck came to London and settled in Herne Hill. His strident public image is not reflected in his suburban private life.
At home, and to his family and to close friends, he is a very gentle soul, actually. He's certainly stable, there's no doubt about that. He's extremely stable, if anything too stable, because he doesn't see any danger in anything, and he needs me to worry for him, really. He's not controversy-seeking, I don't think. No, I think what he does is he causes it by just saying what he thinks is right, but his personality is not like that in private.
Still living somewhere in the extreme south. It's going to move down into France, and then towards the weekend gradually push northwards towards the extreme southern districts once again.
I've lived with him for many years, and I've never known him to be wrong, even though I've wondered sometimes whether what he's saying is correct. But he doesn't stick his neck out, as far as I'm concerned, until he's done so much research, until he's done so much work into the background of things that he's absolutely sure. And I think he quite welcomes then being able to defend that point of view.
His defence of his theory on race and IQ, however, affected the whole of the Eysenck family.
It did affect the family, and we had to actually decide whether we were going to, what we were going to do about it, whether we were going to muzzle him or whether we were going to take some sort of action about it as far as keeping the children out of it. And so we felt that what he was saying and what he was doing was very important, and we just thought we'd divorce the children from that, which we did. We had a temporary name change, which in fact did protect them, because neither the school nor later on their jobs actually knew the connection.
Eysenck's theories of race and IQ were part of his wider belief in the importance of heredity. He insisted that a child's intelligence and personality were largely fixed by their genes. The environment they grew up in wasn't that important.
I don't see that any parent with more than one child can possibly doubt the importance of genetic factors, because siblings can be so very, and usually are so very, very different. If I look at my own children, my oldest son is very introverted, my daughter is extremely extroverted. They differ in almost everything you can think of. And we didn't try to alter their behavior, because it is a hopeless thing to try and do anyway, and why should you? You don't know any better than they do how they should behave or what they're going to be. So I think differences in children in the same family are very powerful proof of the importance of genetic factors.
Emphasising the role of genes and playing down the importance of childhood experiences prepared the way for Eysenck's next major attack. Freud is called the father of psychiatry. The study in London, where he died, remains untouched. Like a shrine, it reflects the status of a man who was worshipped in his own lifetime. In the 50s, psychoanalysis was the dominant and unquestioned form of treatment. Neither Freud nor his methods could be criticised, until Eysenck wrote a blistering attack shaking the very foundation of psychiatry.
I never felt any personal reaction to Freud or his teaching. It is simply that here you have an alleged method of treatment which has never been shown to work, which costs an enormous amount of money to the people who are so treated, which in many cases produces a negative effect. It makes the patients worse, and which is propagandized very heavily by people. This is the only way that you can actually cure neurotic patients. Well, I think ethically this is entirely wrong.
For Freud, the common roots of people's neuroses are exemplified in the characters of Greek myth. Freud taught that by talking through these deep-seated anxieties, the patients could come to terms with their distress. Eysenck rejected all notion of a talking cure. His alternative was behaviour therapy. With behaviour therapy, you don't talk about your anxieties, you confront them.
Psychoanalysts believe that behavior is produced and can be changed by talking, whereas behavior therapists believe that behavior is primary and causes the attitude of the person to change. If you change the behavior, you change his attitude. Whereas the Freudians reduce it to all sorts of terrible Oedipus complexes that originated when she was 3 years old and so on. But it doesn't have any effect. This type of treatment based on an entirely mental concept of that kind simply doesn't work. When I first wrote on the lack of success of psychoanalysis as a therapy, there were several other people who had exactly the same views, who read the same evidence and who presented it in articles. I showed my article to one of them, and he almost blanched, and he said, "You can't say that. We have to collaborate with these people and work with them and so on, and you have to tone it down." I said, if you tone it down, nobody will listen. It's important to put it quite clearly and fundamentally, not to try and tone it down and make peace with the other side and so on. And I said, if you do that, nobody will read it, nobody will pay any attention. That's exactly what happened. What I said wasn't particularly original. Other people were saying exactly the same. But my article is the only one that is now remembered and that is believed by many people to have started this revolution.
Yet despite Eysenck's fierce words, research, partly in response to his own attacks, shows that psychoanalysis is not so easy to dismiss.
I would say that the evidence in favour of psychoanalysis is pretty strong. It is much stronger, for example, than you would find in favour of an expensive form of surgery like heart bypasses, where the evidence is often very thin indeed. The evidence of psychoanalysis is pretty powerful.
Psychoanalysts themselves have their own theories as to why Eysenck attacked Freud in the way he did.
I would say that Hans Eysenck feels that Freud's position and his position are mutually incompatible, that they're occupying the same space, that there can be only one leader of psychology, and it's either Hans Eysenck or Sigmund Freud. Eysenck's childhood, in the way that he reveals it to us, indicates a person who wasn't attended to very carefully, whose achievements, perhaps, whose childhood achievements, his first steps or his first time he rode on a bicycle or whatever, weren't noted as sensitively and as attentively as a lot of other children's achievements are. I think, and most psychoanalysts would agree with me, that when a child is confronted with that kind of early environment, they have to protect themselves from that kind of insensitivity. And one of the ways they can protect themselves is by developing a kind of hard skin, a robustness, which helps them deal with a lack of sensitivity or lack of attunement in their immediate environment.
In fact, in a way, I wasn't brought up at all. My parents were divorced, and I hardly ever saw them. They were traveling around the country, acting and making films and so on. I was brought up, if that's the word, by my grandmother, who was very loving, but certainly not a disciplinarian, and I pretty well could do what I liked and what I wanted. And so I had no upbringing at all in that sense.
Did you say I'll feel better smoking Philip Morris?
Yes, you'll feel better
And here are the reasons why.
Eysenck's latest concern has again put him centre stage. To the horror of the medical establishment, his message now is smoking does not cause cancer. It may be a minority view, but it was warmly received in Spain.
There's a lot of propaganda about the terrible effects of smoking on cancer, coronary heart disease, and so on. People producing all sorts of wholly imaginary figures of how many millions of people lose their lives because of that. Now, I'm not denying for a minute that smoking is a risk factor for cancer and coronary heart disease. But there is no direct evidence that it is a cause of cancer and coronary heart disease. There are hundreds of different risk factors for all these diseases.
Eysenck's claim is that health or illness depends on how you handle stress, and this depends on your personality.
I predicted that cigarette smoking would be much more common among extroverted people than among introverted people. We did a large-scale study to discover this was indeed so. The people who had strong difficulties in expressing their emotions were 6 times as likely as those who did manage to express their emotions to contract lung cancer.
Leading medical researchers find Eysenck's claims incredible.
As far as lung cancer is concerned, since more than 90% of the deaths from lung cancer in Britain are caused by tobacco, I can't see how any other factor could be a cause of more than 6 times as many deaths as smoking is. I mean, you know, you've only got 100%. You can't cause more than 100% of the disease. I'm quite happy to say that there might be some psychological, genetic, nutritional factors which make smoking more dangerous or less dangerous to the individual, but still, smoking is a cause of more than 90% of the deaths from lung cancer in this country. And you can't have anything being 6 times as important as that as a cause of lung cancer.
Before you smoke another cigarette, ask yourself, do you have a big nose to filter out all the nicotine?
If his statements were taken seriously, then they might make people who would otherwise give up smoking less likely to do so, and this might cause a number of unnecessary deaths. I don't know how seriously his ideas get taken. I do know that there's no serious scientific foundation for them.
Eysenck continues to claim that the key to health is understanding stress and personality.
The medical profession hasn't been taught anything about stress, about personality and so on, and they don't want to know. But in 10, 20 years' time, I'm sure they get down to it and find out this really is very important.
Eysenck's latest heresy has made him even more isolated.
I think it's fair to say that, that Professor Eysenck adds to the level of public entertainment. It's rather pleasant to see science enlivened by a bit of buffoonery, and I don't object to that. However, I think he himself, if he was being frank with himself, would see that he's now become more than a parody of what he set out to be. So perhaps it's time he stepped back and looked what he actually now is.
I certainly see Eysenck as one of the relatively few people in my own trade who I know in my bones wouldn't expect to learn anything from me however long I talked. And if you feel that someone, even in principle, couldn't learn anything from anything you said, you don't particularly want to talk to them. There's no exchange, there's no conversation. You simply hear his views, and he dismisses yours, and that's the end of it.
most of the controversy, so-called, I've had is rather as if my little boy said 2 and 2 is 5, and I say no, 2 and 2 is 4. It's not really a controversy. I'm just putting the facts forward, and people who don't like the facts then make a controversy out of it.
His sympathisers recognise his many confrontations, but believe they're a result of his simple passion to speak out whatever the personal cost.
He doesn't like taboos. He doesn't like the fact that there are certain areas of science or certain areas of the world that we cannot investigate. That there's no reason why, if there's no reason why we can't investigate human memory, which as psychologists we do extensively, why can't we look at racial differences, if we can look at gender differences, if we can look at any other sort of differences, why can't we do this? He doesn't like the idea, no doubt for his own early childhood and experiences, of making certain areas acceptable and others unacceptable for scientific investigation.
I think he has an extremely strong sense of not wanting to be muzzled or anybody else to be muzzled. He likes freedom of expression for everyone, and it may be because he was brought up in a Germany where you couldn't do that he's very strong. And that's why he's in this country, because he felt that here you could have freedom of expression.
Whatever the reasons, his contentious style has wrecked any chance of the honours he at one time may have expected to win.
It's very curious, many people have found it very curious, that he hasn't got a knighthood, that he hasn't got, I think he has 1 honorary doctorate. I would argue that a man of his stature should have 20, 30 honorary doctorates. There are certainly comparable examples. It seems to me that any form of honour, an academic honour or a knighthood or whatever, is very difficult to achieve if you spent your whole life being, in his words, a rebel. And as a consequence, he's paid the price. He's paid the price of making the people who could give him those honours very, very annoyed.
It comes as no surprise that people are as divided over his legacy as they are over his ideas.
The residue is the very ugly one of science or pseudoscience about issues like race being done in the service of prejudice. And I think that's very regrettable. It's bad for the memory of his name, and it's bad for the trade. I think it's got us an ugly name.
He's been brave enough to say things that other people would not say. He's been radical enough to disagree with consensus. All of these things have meant that he has, I think, in many areas, been ahead of his times. And that's why his influence will live on for many years to come.
There's nothing sadder than a scientific maverick who is wrong, and I think probably knows he's wrong, unwilling to accept the fact. And that, I fear, is the position which Professor Eysenck finds himself in now.
I'm not a maverick at all. This is just an impression given by the media because they like to give that kind of impression, and because I don't like the facts, or many of the facts, like the genetic importance in intelligence and personality. They like a kind of egalitarianism and so on, the politically correct, etc. From that point of view, of course, I don't like it, but nevertheless it is a fact of life. And all I'm doing is presenting the facts of life and get clobbered accordingly.